Oh, Mother, don't be so dramatic. It's just a little ache. Brenda said it with a bright, tight smile. We were in my kitchen. The air still smelled of the roast chicken I'd made for their weekly visit. My son, Mark, just shifted in his chair and looked down at his plate. Brenda, his wife, stood with her hand on her hip, looking at me like I was a fussy child. A hot flush of shame crept up my neck. The pain in my hip wasn't just an ache. It was a sharp, grinding thing that woke me up at night. But to her, it wasn't real, just a performance. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't about my hip. It was about whether my own son believed me anymore. After Brenda cleared the plates with a little too much clatter, I tried again. I turned to Mark. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the short silence. The doctor is a bit concerned about the arthritis, honey, I said, keeping my voice low. He mentioned a new specialist. Oh, speaking of specialists? Brenda cut in, sliding her phone across the table toward Mark. Look at this resort in Mexico. It specializes in total relaxation. Her voice was loud and cheerful. Mark picked up the phone, his face lit by the glowing screen, showing a white sand beach. I just sat there, my half-finished cup of tea growing cold in my hands. It was like I had faded into the floral wallpaper behind me. A piece of furniture you talk around, not to. Later, as they were getting their coats, Brenda put her arm through Mark's. She gave me a look of deep, practiced concern. You know, Mark, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. Your mother forgot Mrs. Henderson's first name at the potluck last week. She called her Betty, but her name is Susan. I opened my mouth to say that Betty was her sister's name. An easy mistake. But Brenda kept going. Maybe you should start helping her with her bills, just to be safe. We wouldn't want her getting confused and missing a payment. I looked at my son. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Brenda, and his brow was furrowed with worry. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. It wasn't my memory she was attacking. It was my independence. The silence after the front door clicked shut was a relief and a burden. I walked through my quiet house, my hand trailing along the back of my late husband's favourite armchair. I sat down at my little desk in the corner and turned on the computer. The screen glowed in the dim room. I logged into my bank account, my fingers a little shaky. The numbers were all there, just as they should be. My Social Security payment had arrived on the 1st. Frank's small pension was there too. It was a tight budget, but it was mine. I had managed it for 40 years, and I had never missed a payment in my life. Just then, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Brenda. Just want to make sure you took your evening pills. XOXO. My breath caught in my chest. It didn't feel like care. It felt like a leash. I picked up the phone, but I didn't text Brenda back. I called Carol. She picked up on the second ring, her voice as warm and comforting as the Afghan on my lap. Eleanor, is everything all right, dear? No, Carol, it's not, I said. And then it all came tumbling out. The comment about my hip, the vacation plans, the sly suggestion about my finances. Carol just listened, making little humming sounds of agreement. The sound of her quiet attention was like a balm on a burn. She's trying to paint you into a corner, Carol said when I was done. Her voice was firm. She's making you sound frail and confused so she can step in and take over. But Mark, he's my son. He listens to her. Of course he does, Carol said, a sad wisdom in her tone. You have to be careful, Eleanor. Wolves often wear smiles. My weekly trip to the grocery store used to be a little pleasure. I liked the smell of the fresh bread from the bakery section and the cool air that puffed out from the frozen food aisle. But that Tuesday, the pleasure was gone. I was in the produce section, trying to decide between a bag of russets or a few sweet potatoes, when I saw Linda. She was one of Brenda's friends from her book club. Linda gave me a sad little wave. Her eyes were full of a terrible, sticky pity. "Eleanor, dear?" she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "How are you holding up?" I just looked at her. Holding up from what? From living in my own home and buying my own potatoes? I managed a tight smile. "I'm just fine, Linda. Enjoy your day." I pushed my cart past her, my cheeks burning. It was clear Brenda had been talking. The story of my condition was spreading, like a stain on my good name. I decided I had to try one more time. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe if Brenda heard it from my heart, she would understand. I invited her for tea the next afternoon, without Mark. She arrived smelling of expensive perfume that always gave me a headache. I poured the tea into my good china cups, the ones with the little blue flowers my Frank had given me. "Brenda," I started, my hands folded on the kitchen table. "I feel we need to talk. I know you're worried about me, but hearing you talk about my health that way, it hurts. My mind is perfectly fine. I just want a little respect for my independence." I told her about my fears, the real ones, about my arthritis getting worse, about one day not being able to garden. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her touch was cool and quick. "Oh, Eleanor, of course. I'm so sorry if I upset you. You can always, always count on me." Her voice was so sincere. As she pulled her hand back, I noticed her phone sitting face up on the table between us, its little screen glowing. I didn't think anything of it. Not then. That evening, the phone rang. The sound made me jump. It was Mark. His voice, usually so warm when he spoke to me, had a new, cool edge to it. He wasn't asking. He was telling. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said. "Brenda and I were talking, and we really think it's time we started getting your affairs in order, just to make things easier down the road." My blood went cold. Getting my affairs in order. It was the exact phrase Brenda had used when she was patting my hand, telling me she understood. That sympathetic chat over tea hadn't been a conversation. It had been an interrogation, and I was the suspect. A deep, cold dread settled in my bones. It was a feeling I hadn't had since Frank passed away. My own house, the one Frank and I had built with love and laughter, no longer felt safe. It felt like a place where I was being watched. I started noticing small things. A stack of mail on the counter moved just slightly from where I always left it. Brenda asking a casual question over the phone. "Oh, by the way, where do you keep the spare house key, just in case of an emergency?" The questions were always wrapped in the language of care, but they felt like a locksmith sizing up a lock. The pressure was a constant, low hum of anxiety in my chest, like a refrigerator that never shuts off. That Sunday, we had our weekly family dinner at Mark and Brenda's house. The air was thick with the smell of roast beef and unspoken tension. After dinner, Brenda stood up, clinking her fork against her water glass. "I have a funny story about my dear mother-in-law," she announced to the table. She told everyone how I'd spent 10 minutes looking for my reading glasses that morning, only to find them on top of my head. The whole table chuckled. My son, my own son, laughed along with them. It wasn't a warm, shared laugh. It was the kind of laughter that separates one person from the rest of the group. I sat there, a polite smile frozen on my face, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. That was it. The injustice of it all hardened in my heart, turning from hurt into a small, hard piece of stone. This could not continue. The next week, Mark came over for his usual Tuesday visit. He helped me bring in the garbage cans and fixed a leaky faucet under the kitchen sink. When it was time for him to go, he hugged me at the door. "Love you, Mum. I'll call you tomorrow." "You too, dear," I said, patting his arm. He was halfway down the driveway when I saw it. His tablet, sitting on the little table by the door where he'd set down his keys. I picked it up to call after him, but his car was already turning onto the main road. The screen lit up with a soft ping. A notification from something called Miller Family Chat. Brenda's name was at the top. Underneath it, I saw a little icon of a sound wave and a caption. "Listen to this," she had written. "The poor dear is really losing it." My blood ran cold. My hand started to shake, and I had to grip the heavy tablet with both hands to keep from dropping it. I knew what it was. I knew before I even pressed the little triangle to play it. It was my voice. From that afternoon, I had tried to be honest with her. I sank into the armchair by the window, the floral fabric rough against my cheek. I pressed play. My own voice filled the quiet room, thin and worried. I heard myself talking about my arthritis, about my fear of falling, about wanting to stay in my own home. It was a recording of me at my most vulnerable. Then, the comments from the family started to appear below it. "Oh, the poor thing," from my cousin Susan. "Mark, you need to step in," from an uncle. It was a sea of pity and concern, all of it orchestrated by Brenda. The betrayal was a physical thing. It felt like swallowing a shard of glass. I thought of all the casseroles I'd taken to Susan when she was sick, the $100 bills I'd slipped into my nephew's hand for college books. These people, my family, were discussing me like a problem to be solved. I felt sick to my stomach. My own home, the place where I'd raised my son, suddenly felt like a stage where I was the main, tragic character in a play I didn't know I was in. I did not cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It settled in my bones, a cold, hard weight that pushed out everything else. I looked at the screen, at my own family's words, and the sadness burned away. It left something else in its place. Focus. With a steady hand, I held my finger down on the notification until a little trash can icon appeared. I deleted it. Mark would never know I had seen it. I wiped the screen clean with the hem of my sweater and placed the tablet back on the table by the door. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly in the silence. It sounded like a countdown. "They thought my mind was fading," I whispered to the empty room. "They never once considered it was sharpening." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark with a cup of chamomile tea that I never drank. The liquid grew cold in the mug. My mind kept replaying Brenda's words, her fake sympathy. Then another memory floated up, from months ago. Brenda had been complaining about a real estate commission check that was late. She'd been stirring her coffee so hard, it sloshed over the side of her cup. "This is ridiculous," she'd snapped, looking at Mark. "I wish we could just get our hands on your inheritance now instead of waiting forever." At the time, I'd thought it was just a moment of frustration, a poor choice of words. But now, hearing it again in my mind, it sounded different. It sounded like a plan. An idea, sharp and dangerous, began to form in my mind. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. The next morning, I did not call my friend Carol. I did not go to the church potluck planning meeting. I looked up a name in the phone book, a name I'd seen on a flyer at the senior center. "Davies Elder Law," it said. I dialed the number. "I need to make an appointment," I told the polite young woman who answered. It's about updating my will and power of attorney. Mr. Davies's office was downtown, in an old brick building with a quiet, sturdy elevator. The waiting room smelled of lemon polish and old paper. I had gone to the bank first, withdrawing $300 in cash from my emergency fund. I paid the consultation fee with crisp $20 bills. I didn't want a credit card statement sent to my house. Mr. Davies was a kind-looking man with grey hair and glasses. He didn't talk down to me. He listened. He explained my rights, the power of a living trust, and the importance of having the right person as my durable power of attorney. "The person you choose, Eleanor," he said, his voice calm and serious, "should be someone who respects your wishes above all else." I knew, with absolute certainty, that person was no longer my son. The next morning, I drove to the bank downtown. The air inside smelled of clean paper and faint perfume. I stood at the marble counter, my purse clutched in my hands, and asked the young teller for printouts of all my accounts. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Gable?" she asked, her brow furrowed with professional concern. "Everything is becoming clear," I told her, and I think I smiled. Back home, I laid the papers out on my dining room table. The numbers stared up at me, a summary of a careful life. I went to the old metal box in my husband Frank's closet and pulled out the deed to our house and his pension paperwork. The documents felt heavy, important. I spread them out next to the bank statements. This wasn't just paper. It was my life, my independence. They thought I was a memory. I was becoming a plan. Looking at it all, I realized I had everything I needed to build a fortress. I drove to the big electronics store by the mall, a place that always hummed with a nervous energy. The lights were too bright, and the music was too loud. I found a young man with a name tag that said Kyle, and asked him for a simple voice recorder. "For lectures?" he asked, pointing to a fancy one with a dozen buttons. "For conversations," I said. "I need one that starts with one touch." He showed me a small, slim silver one. It fit perfectly in the palm of my hand. Back in my car, I unwrapped it from the stiff plastic. In the quiet of my own garage, I practiced. I slipped it into my cardigan pocket. I pressed the small red button through the fabric. A tiny light glowed for a second, then went dark. It was recording. I pressed it again. It stopped. My heart was thumping a little too fast. This small piece of plastic felt like a weapon, and I wasn't sure I had the courage to use it. The phone rang on Thursday afternoon, right on schedule. It was Brenda, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. "Just checking in on my favorite mother-in-law," she chirped. I let my own voice tremble just a little. "Oh, Brenda, dear, it's so good to hear from you." I made a show of sighing, the sound of static on the line between us. "Everything okay? You sound tired," she said, her concern as thin as a paper napkin. "It's just things to think about," I said vaguely. "My friend Carol from church, you know her? She was just telling me she's getting her will updated. It puts things in your head, you know." I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the silent calculation. The bait was in the water, and I knew a shark when I heard one. I invited them for lunch on Saturday. I made my special roast chicken, the one Mark always loved. The house filled with the warm smell of rosemary and garlic. We sat at the dining room table, the good china catching the afternoon light. "This is wonderful, Mom," Mark said, his mouth full. Brenda just picked at her food. "It is lovely, Eleanor." I took a slow sip of my iced tea. "I've been thinking about what to do with the house and my savings," I said, looking at a spot on the wall just over their heads. "The local animal shelter does such good work. I was thinking of leaving a significant portion to them. Those poor cats and dogs have no one. Mark looked surprised. That's generous, Mom. But I was watching Brenda. Her smile didn't move, but her eyes went hard and tight. A flicker of pure greed, so fast I might have missed it if I wasn't looking. My hand was steady in my cardigan pocket, my fingers resting on the cool, smooth surface of the recorder. I didn't turn it on. Not yet. After lunch, Mark went out to the garden to rake up some fallen leaves from the big oak tree. I could hear the gentle scrape of the rake against the grass. I found Brenda in the kitchen, stacking plates by the sink. "Brenda, dear, could you help me with something?" I asked, holding up a complicated-looking form from Medicare. My eyes get so tired with this small print. She came over to the table, her perfume hanging in the air. We sat down, our heads close together over the paper. I let out a long, weary sigh. "It's all so much to handle," I said, my voice soft and defeated. "All these papers, the bills, the house." I looked up at her, letting my shoulders slump. Maybe Mark is right. Maybe I should just let him take over. The trap was set, the door wide open. All she had to do was walk through it. Brenda took the bait. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The air in my living room was thick with the scent of her perfume and the leftover smell of chicken salad sandwiches. "You really should let Mark handle everything," she said, her eyes gleaming. "It's what he wants. But you need to make sure he gets the old lady's money before she wastes it all on stray cats." She smiled, as if she were sharing a clever inside joke. She thought she was quoting me, twisting my words into her own greedy narrative. My hand was steady in my cardigan pocket. My thumb found the small, hard button on the digital recorder. I pressed it once. A grim, quiet satisfaction settled deep in my chest. The recording was saved. I spent the next few days in quiet preparation. The hum of my old desktop computer was a comforting sound as I transferred the audio file to my phone. I saved it in 3 different places. You can never be too careful. Then I picked up the phone and called Mr. Davies, the lawyer. I didn't say much. I just told his secretary I needed to make immediate changes to my trust and my will. I told her exactly what those changes were. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she just said, "Yes, Mrs. Miller. I will have the documents drawn up." That evening, my phone rang. The screen showed Mark's face. "Mom," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. "Brenda wants to host a big family dinner next Sunday. She says it's to honor you." I knew exactly what kind of honor they had in mind. I was seated at the head of the long, polished dining table. The whole family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Their faces swam in the light of the big chandelier overhead. The air smelled of roast beef and Brenda's expensive scented candles. After the main course plates were cleared, Brenda stood up. She tapped her wine glass with a fork. The tinkling sound made my teeth ache. "I just want to say a few words," she began, smiling at everyone but me. She talked about family, about love, and about the duty we have to look after our elders. Then her eyes settled on me. "We all know Mum has been having some memory lapses lately. We think it's time for a collective decision about her care and her finances." Brenda's smile was full of pity. "It's not her fault, of course," she continued, her voice syrupy sweet. "We all heard how confused she is." She glanced around the table, making eye contact with the relatives who had listened to her first recording. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic little bird. But I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs making a soft, scraping sound on the wood floor. I stood up. "It's true that recordings can be very revealing," I said. My voice was calm and clear. It didn't even tremble. I reached into my handbag, which was sitting on the empty chair beside me. I took out my phone and the small black Bluetooth speaker I had bought at the electronics store. I set them on the table. "Brenda, you're right," I said, looking directly at her. "The family should hear the truth." I pressed the button on my phone. The speaker made a soft, electronic chime as it connected. In the sudden, heavy silence of the dining room, Brenda's voice filled the air. It was tinny and sharp, and unmistakably hers. "Get the old lady's money before she wastes it all on stray cats." The words hung in the air like poison. Brenda's face drained of all colour. She looked like a ghost. I watched my son, Mark, turn his head slowly, looking from my phone to his wife. His expression was one of pure, horrified disbelief. The rest of the family just stared at their dinner plates, frozen. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. I pressed the stop button on my phone. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The only noise in the whole room was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My cousin dropped her fork, and it clattered against her china plate like a gunshot. Brenda's face was chalk white, a strange contrast to the bright red of her dress. Mark stared at her, his mouth slightly open, his own plate of half-eaten pot roast forgotten. I looked directly at my daughter-in-law. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the table. The truth, I find, has a longer running time. She didn't scream or cry. She didn't say a word. She just snatched her beaded purse from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the wood floor. Without looking at anyone, she turned and walked out of the dining room. A moment later, we all heard the front door slam shut. Mark still hadn't moved. He looked like a statue, a monument to shame. Around the table, aunts and cousins suddenly found their dinner plates fascinating. No one met my eyes. The smell of gravy and yeast rolls now seemed thick and suffocating. I calmly folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I picked up my purse and the small Bluetooth speaker. My movements felt steady and deliberate. "Well," I said to the room at large, "thank you for the dinner?" I looked at my son, whose face was just starting to crumble. "I'll be going home now. I have some calls to make." He didn't try to stop me. No one did. I walked out of that house, my back straight, and didn't look back once. Driving home, the streetlights painted yellow stripes across my dashboard. The familiar rumble of my old Buick was a comforting sound. With every mile that passed between me and that house, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. It wasn't a loud, giddy feeling. It was a deep, quiet hum of rightness, of things being put back in their proper place. When I unlocked my own front door, the air inside smelled of my lemon polish and old books. It was the smell of safety. I walked through the quiet rooms, touching the back of my husband's favorite armchair, running a hand over the cool, smooth surface of my kitchen counter. The power wasn't in the fight. It was in this. It was mine again. My home was my sanctuary once more. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table while the sky turned from grey to pale pink. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called Mr. Davies, my lawyer. Then I called a courier service. An hour later, a young man in a crisp uniform delivered an envelope to Mark's downtown office. Inside was a new power of attorney document, notarized and legally binding. It revoked all of Mark's authority over my affairs. The new authority was assigned to my niece, Sarah, who always sent me cards for my birthday and never for a reason. I sent a second courier to Brenda's real estate office. Her envelope contained the same document. I wanted her to see, on her own letterhead-covered desk, that her influence was officially over. My phone started ringing around lunchtime. It rang all day. The first call was from my cousin Martha. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I never should have listened. We were worried." "Thank you for your call, Martha," I said, and nothing more. I didn't need to explain myself. I answered each call with the same polite distance. I accepted their apologies, but I knew things had changed for good. I was just finishing a small bowl of soup for dinner when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. It was Mark. He was standing on my porch alone, his shoulders slumped and his eyes red. I let him in, but I didn't walk toward the kitchen. I led him to the formal living room, the one with the stiff sofa my late husband Frank had called the waiting room. I didn't offer him tea. The air from the AC vent hummed quietly as we sat across from each other. His eyes were red, just like I'd seen from the doorway. "Mum, I am so sorry," he started, his voice thick. "Brenda? She gets these ideas in her head. She twisted everything." I just looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to scrape his knee, and the man who let his wife try to break my spirit. "You are a grown man, Mark," I said, my voice even and calm. "You made your choice. Now I've made mine." He opened his mouth to say more, but no words came out. He just sat there, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply told him that my niece, Sarah, now held my power of attorney for both health and finances. I told him the living trust had been updated, with Sarah as the trustee. The air in the room felt very still. "You are still my son," I said, looking at a dust mote dancing in a sliver of evening sun. "I will always love you, but my life, my home, and my money are no longer your concern." He just nodded. His shoulders slumped. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The boundary was there now, a wall made not of anger, but of simple, quiet fact. A week later, I woke up, and the first thing I felt was not anxiety, but peace. The house was quiet in a good way. The dread that had been sitting on my chest for months was just gone. That afternoon, I drove to the community centre and signed up for the gardening club. I spent the next Saturday on my knees in a communal flower bed, my hands deep in the cool, dark soil. The smell of the earth was rich and real. I planted a row of marigolds, their bright orange faces turned up to the sun. It felt like I was planting a new life for myself, one seed at a time. My friend Carol and I started taking walks in the park on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. We didn't walk fast. We just ambled along the paved path, listening to the birds and the distant sound of children laughing on the playground. "My new tomato plants are looking a little yellow," I told her one morning. "Probably need some Epsom salts," she said, squinting at a fat robin on the grass. We talked about books and the sermon from Sunday and the rising price of eggs. We never once mentioned Brenda. I was building my family back, one trusted friend at a time. The letter arrived on a Friday. It was in a thick, cream-coloured envelope with the name of a law firm printed in the corner. My hands were steady as I opened it. It was from a lawyer representing Brenda. The words were fancy, but the meaning was simple. She was hinting at challenging my competency. I didn't panic. I just picked up my phone and took a clear picture of the letter. I sent it in an email to Mr. Davies with the subject line, "Just as you predicted." 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "Don't you worry about a thing, Eleanor," Mr. Davies's calm voice said. "We were prepared for this." I decided to have a small dinner party. Not a big family affair with unspoken tensions, but a real party. I invited my niece, Sarah, and my best friend, Carol. I roasted a chicken, the way my husband Frank always liked it, with rosemary and lemon. The whole house smelled warm and safe. We sat around my little dining table, the good china for once. The clink of our forks on the plates was the only sound for a moment, besides the soft music from my old radio. Carol told a story about the new pastor's wife that made Sarah laugh so hard she snorted. I looked at their happy faces in the warm lamplight, and the sound of their laughter filled up all the cold, empty spaces in the house. "It's so good to see you like this, Aunt Eleanor," Sarah said, patting my hand. "This is how it's supposed to be," I said, and I meant it. This easy warmth was a world away from that terrible dinner. This was real. After they left, I stood in the quiet house, the scent of rosemary still in the air. The silence felt different now. It felt like peace. The next week, I did something just for me. I walked down to the public library and signed up to be a volunteer. They put me in the children's section, reading stories on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The room smelled of old paper and that lemon polish they use on the floors. I sat in a big, squashy armchair with a picture book about a runaway bear. A little girl with pigtails leaned against my knee, her small body warm and trusting. When I made the bear's voice deep and growly, the children all giggled. That sound, so pure and happy, was like a balm on my heart. For 2 hours, I wasn't Mark's mother. I wasn't a problem to be managed. I was just Eleanor, the lady who read the stories. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, smiled at me as I left. "You're a natural, Eleanor. They loved you." On my way out, I stopped at the desk. I put my name down for the next month, a new sense of purpose settling in my bones. The following Monday, my lawyer called. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting it to be Carol. "Eleanor, it's Robert Davies," he said. His voice was always so calm, so professional. "I have an update for you. I received a letter from an attorney representing Brenda Miller." I held my breath, my hand still on the damp counter. And I sent them a reply," he said. "I included a copy of the cognitive assessment you took last week, along with a strongly worded letter regarding the legal definition of a frivolous lawsuit." There was a pause. "I don't expect you'll be hearing from them again." A wave of relief washed over me, so strong I had to sit down. "Thank you, Mr. Davies." "You're welcome, Eleanor. You were prepared." I hung up the phone and looked out the window at my rose bushes. It was another quiet victory. Brenda had played her last card, and it was a losing one. I wondered what she would do now, with no more weapons left to use. The phone rang again that evening. I almost didn't answer, but I saw from the caller ID that it was Mark. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. "Mom?" His voice was hesitant, small. "I'm here, Mark," I said. My tone was neutral. Not warm, not cold. Just a fact. There was a long silence on his end. I could hear him breathing. I was wondering. The weather is supposed to be nice on Saturday. I was wondering if maybe you needed some help in the garden." I looked out at the weeds that were starting to creep into the petunia bed. I could certainly use the help. But this wasn't about weeds. I thought for a moment, feeling the old dynamic trying to pull me in. I refused. "1 hour?" I said finally. "Next Saturday, 10 o'clock. I hung up the phone, my heart beating just a little faster. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing. Mark arrived at 10 o'clock on the dot. He didn't try to come inside, just stood on the porch in old jeans, holding a pair of dusty work gloves. I handed him the trowel and the bucket, and we went to work on the rose beds. We didn't talk for a long time. The only sounds were the scrape of the trowel in the dirt and the chirping of sparrows in the oak tree. The sun was warm on my back. He pulled a stubborn patch of crabgrass, his knuckles white. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Brenda and we're in counseling." I paused, my hand deep in the cool soil around the base of a climbing rose. I looked at my son, at the tired lines around his eyes. I didn't say, "It's about time." I didn't say, "I hope it helps." I didn't say anything at all. I simply nodded once and handed him the trowel. He took it, his shoulders slumping just a little. He knew, I think, that my silence was the only answer I had. After the dust settled, the silence in my big house felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was just empty. The living room where Brenda had made her speech felt cold, even with the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. The house was full of ghosts, and not all of them were friendly. I decided then and there. This was a museum of a life I no longer lived. I called Carol. "Who was that realtor you used?" I asked. "The one you said was a real bulldog." An hour later, a pleasant woman named Janice was sitting at my kitchen table. She didn't work for Brenda's company. That was the whole point. We signed the papers, and the next morning, a bright red sign was hammered into my front lawn. It felt like planting a flag for a new country. Janice was good to her word. She showed me 3 different places in a week. The first smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. The second was tiny, with windows that looked out onto a brick wall. The third one, though, was just right. It was a condo in a 55-plus community, all on one floor. I walked onto the small patio, and the sun warmed my face. I could hear the gentle hum of the community pool's filter system and the chirping of sparrows in a nearby crepe myrtle. "I can put my roses in pots right here," I said, mostly to myself. Janice smiled. "It gets wonderful morning light." Back inside, I ran my hand over the smooth, cool granite of the kitchen counter. It was smaller than my old house, but it felt solid. It felt like a fresh start. Signing the offer felt less like an ending and more like opening the first page of a new book. Then came the hard part, sorting through 50 years of life. Every closet I opened released a puff of memories that smelled like cedar and lavender. I found my wedding dress, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper. I found Mark's first baseball glove, the leather stiff and cracked. I packed a cardboard box with his report cards and the lopsided clay ashtray he made me for Mother's Day in 2nd grade. He came by to pick it up. "Wow, Mom, I can't believe you kept all this," he said, his voice thick. I just patted his arm. "You were my boy." After he left, I went to tackle the old chest at the foot of my bed. It was full of winter blankets. Beneath them, tucked into a corner, were 3 leather-bound books. I opened one. The familiar, neat handwriting made my breath catch in my throat. They were my Frank's old journals. That night, I didn't pack. I made a pot of tea and sat in my favorite armchair, the one Frank always used to steal. The lamplight glowed on the brittle pages. I read for hours. He wrote about fixing the leaky faucet, about his pride when Mark learned to ride a bike, about how much he loved my apple pie. Then I found an entry from the year before he passed. He wrote about watching me argue with the man from the electric company over a billing error. "Eleanor is a fortress," he wrote. "She doesn't know how strong she is, but I do. She'll be all right." Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't sad tears. It felt like he was right there in the room, his warm hand on my shoulder, telling me I was doing the right thing. It was a permission slip from the past to embrace my future. The day the house sale closed, I met Janice at the title company. The office was quiet, except for the rustle of papers and the low hum of the copy machine. I signed my name over and over, my hand steady. The young man slid a check across the polished table. "Congratulations, Mrs. Gable," he said with a polite smile. I didn't even look at the number. I just folded it and put it in my purse. Later that day, at my own bank, I sat with a financial advisor Carol had recommended. We moved the money into safe, solid investments. When I got home to my new, clean condo, I logged into my bank account online. The number that appeared on the screen didn't make me feel rich. It made me feel safe. It was a quiet, solid wall between me and ever needing to depend on anyone else again. It was the feeling of pure, unburdened freedom. I settled into my new condo like a hand slipping into a well-worn glove. The community was called Willow Creek, and it was buzzing with life. From my little patio, I could smell the faint scent of chlorine from the community pool and hear the cheerful click-clack of pickleball games in the afternoon. My new neighbours, a retired couple named Bill and Mary, brought over a lemon loaf cake the day I moved in. It was still warm from their oven. "We have a book club that meets on Tuesdays," Mary told me, her eyes twinkling. "And Bill here is always looking for a fourth for bridge on Fridays." "I'd like that very much," I said, and I meant it. My social calendar, which had been empty for so long, started to fill up with coffee dates and potluck dinners. There was a low hum of activity here, a feeling of people choosing to be together. My little home was quiet, but I was never lonely. I realized my old house had been quiet too, but it had been the silence of isolation. This was the silence of peace. Mark continued his weekly visits, but now he came to my new condo. He never mentioned Brenda's name. It was like a stone had been dropped into a lake, and we were both content to let it sink to the bottom without another ripple. He would help me with small things, like changing a high light bulb or carrying a heavy bag of potting soil out to my patio. One Saturday, he was helping me hang a framed picture of my late husband, Frank. He held it steady against the wall. "Is that straight, Mom?" he asked. "A little to the left," I said, squinting. He adjusted it. "Perfect." He tapped the nail in and stood back. We looked at the picture together. Frank was smiling, his arm around me on our 25th anniversary. "He would have liked it here," Mark said quietly. I just nodded. Our new relationship was like that, built of small gestures and unspoken truths. He was trying, and for now, that was enough. My niece, Sarah, called me every Wednesday evening, right after her yoga class. It became our little ritual. She never called to ask for anything or to check up on me. She just called to talk. The sound of her cheerful voice on the phone was like a warm blanket. "Aunt Eleanor, you will not believe the disaster I made in the kitchen tonight," she said, laughing. "I tried to make that lasagna recipe you gave me, and I used salt instead of sugar in the sauce." I chuckled. "Oh, honey, I did that once with a batch of Christmas cookies. Frank said they were an acquired taste." We talked for nearly an hour about nothing and everything. When we hung up, I sat in my comfortable armchair, the television humming softly in the background. I looked at the little silver frame on my end table with a picture of Sarah and me at her college graduation. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not an obligation, but a joy. It was a simple, uncomplicated kindness, and it meant more to me than all the grand apologies in the world. I decided to do something I had dreamed of for years. I booked a 7-day cruise to Alaska, all by myself. Carol drove me to the airport and hugged me tight. "Send me a postcard of a whale," she said. Standing on the deck of the ship as it pulled away from the shore, I felt a thrill of pure freedom. The air was cold and smelled of salt and pine. I spent my days watching glaciers carve into the sea and reading novels in a deck chair, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. I was just Eleanor, a woman seeing the world. Not a mother, not a widow, not an old lady to be managed. I sent 3 postcards. To Carol, I wrote about the magnificent eagle I saw. To Sarah, I described the incredible blue of the icebergs. To Mark, I kept it simple. "It's very beautiful here," I wrote. "See you soon. Love, Mum." As the ship turned back toward home, I felt a quiet excitement. I was returning to a life that I had built, one that was waiting just for me. Mark was there to pick me up from the airport. He looked tired, with new lines around his eyes. He took my suitcase, and we walked to the car in a comfortable silence. The hum of the tires on the highway was the only sound for a few miles. "I moved out," he said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the road. "Brenda and we've officially separated. I have an apartment now." I didn't say anything. I just watched the city lights slide by the window. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't sad either. It was just a fact, like the changing of the seasons. As he pulled up in front of my condo, he shut off the engine and turned to me. The faint glow of the dashboard lights illuminated his face. He asked, "Mum, can I ever truly earn your forgiveness?" I looked at my son. He wasn't the boy who used to scrape his knees in my backyard. He was a man with his own hurts, many of them self-inflicted. The lines around his eyes were deeper now. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I can give you, Mark," I said, my voice steady. The air from the vents hummed quietly. "It's something you have to find for yourself, by living right." I paused, then added the only thing that was left. "But I love you." It was the most honest thing I had said to him in years. He didn't cry, but his shoulders slumped with a weight I couldn't carry for him. He just nodded, a slow, painful movement. I knew then that our old relationship was over, but maybe, just maybe, a new one could begin to grow in its place. Months passed. My new life settled into a pleasant, peaceful rhythm. I named the fluffy orange cat I adopted Frank, after my late husband. He had the same calm way of watching the world. My days were full. Tuesday was the book club in the community centre library, where the air always smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Thursday was bridge with Carol and 2 other ladies. Most mornings, I was out on my patio, my hands in the soil of my potted tomato plants and herbs. My neighbour, a retired music teacher named George, would often lean over the railing. "Those tomatoes are looking professional, Eleanor," he'd say. "The secret is good soil and a little bit of gossip," I'd tell him back. The drama with Brenda felt like a story I'd read in a book about someone else, a long, long time ago. Just before Christmas, I was sorting through a stack of cards on my small kitchen table. The scent of pine from a little wreath hung on the door. I saw an envelope with a return address from my cousin Martha, one of the people in Brenda's family chat. I opened it with a bit of caution. Inside, along with a picture of her grandchildren, was a handwritten note on a slip of paper. It was short. "Eleanor," it read, "your courage has inspired me more than you know. I'm finally dealing with my own difficult daughter-in-law." I held the note in my hand for a long time, the paper thin against my fingertips. I had only wanted my own peace, but it seemed my quiet stand had sent out ripples I never expected. One Sunday afternoon, Mark came by for coffee. He seemed nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other on my new welcome mat. "Mum," he said, "there's someone I'd like you to meet, if that's okay." A few minutes later, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile walked in. Her name was Susan, and she was a second-grade teacher. She didn't gush or try too hard. She just looked at me and said, "It's so lovely to meet you, Eleanor. Mark told me you grow the best jasmine on your patio." We sat and talked for an hour. She spoke to me like a person, not a problem to be managed. As they left, I saw a glimmer of the happy, easygoing son I once knew. It gave me a quiet hope, not for me, but for him. Tonight, I sat on my patio as the sun went down, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A warm breeze rustled the leaves of my jasmine plant, and the sweet smell filled the air. Frank the cat was a warm, purring weight on my lap. I held a cup of chamomile tea, its heat seeping into my hands. I wasn't waiting for a phone call, or an apology, or for the next chapter to begin. I was simply here. I was at peace, in a life I had built for myself. My truth, I realized, had been more than enough.